In the mid-20th century, psychoanalyst René Spitz observed a terrifying phenomenon in institutionalized infants. If these babies were fed and kept clean, but deprived of handling and physical intimacy, they sank into an irreversible decline. This fatal biological chain reaction is known as marasmus. Without sufficient sensory stimulation, the infant's brainstem deteriorates. The result is severe apathy, neurological decay, and eventually death. As we grow, this physical craving doesn't vanish, it compromises. We learn to survive on more subtle, symbolic forms of handling: a nod, a spoken greeting, a brief conversation. We develop a lifelong striving known as recognition hunger. Dr. Berne defined the fundamental unit of social action as a stroke. A stroke is any measurable act implying recognition of another's presence. The physiological stakes of acquiring these strokes are absolute. Receiving them maintains the health of your nervous system, preventing the biological equivalent of starvation. Or, as Berne summarized the reality, if you are not stroked, your spinal cord will shrivel up. This reveals a stark biological reality. Any form of social intercourse, no matter how trivial, hostile, or toxic, offers a distinct survival advantage over complete isolation. To understand how we exchange these strokes, Dr. Berne developed structural analysis. This framework identifies human personality as a shifting repertoire of observable ego states. This diagram maps these shifts. The top parent circle represents feelings and postures mimicked from your parents. The middle adult circle is an objective data processor, calculating probabilities. The bottom child circle consists of archaic relics, exact emotional behaviors fixated upon during childhood. These are physiological realities. At any given moment, one of these distinct neurological states of being takes executive control of the brain. Diagnosing exactly which ego state holds that executive power during an interaction is the necessary first step to mapping the precise vectors of human conflict. When two people encounter each other, one will eventually acknowledge the other's presence. This initial stimulus, met by a response, forms a transaction. We map exchanges. A surgeon requests a scalpel, a nurse hands it over. The vector fires horizontally, adult to adult, and returns identically. But complementary vectors don't require equal power. If a child asks for water and a mother brings it, the stimulus vector moves diagonally up to parent and returns parallel back down. The actual topic of conversation is entirely irrelevant to the stability of the exchange. You could be solving a complex engineering problem or engaging in trivial neighborhood gossip. The first rule of communication states that as long as the transactional vectors remain parallel, the conversation can proceed indefinitely. But conversations routinely fail, often with sudden and confusing hostility. This typically happens when a transaction becomes crossed. Imagine a husband asks an objective adult question, "Do you know where my keys are?" If his wife suddenly flares up, her response originates from her child, targeting his parent. The vector physically intersects the initial stimulus. This maps perfectly to classical transference, reacting to an historical authority dynamic. The inverse is countertransference. If a patient makes an adult observation and the therapist responds with condescension, the vector shoots from parent down to child, crossing the lines again. The immediate clinical consequence is that the adult problem-solving process is instantly decommissioned. This leads to the strict communication rule. The exact moment transactional vectors cross, dialogue breaks down. The conversation must be suspended until the ego states can be realigned. Transparent communication is rare in complex social settings. Social programming often masks deeper, underlying psychological motives, creating what is known as the ulterior transaction. In an angular transaction, an ostensibly logical statement conceals a hidden hook. It is deliberately aimed at a more vulnerable ego state to force a specific outcome. Consider a salesman. "This is better, but you can't afford it." An adult-to-adult statement, but a dotted vector reveals the psychological level, targeting the customer's rebellious child. Transactions can also be duplex. Two people politely discuss architecture. Solid lines connect their adults, while simultaneously, two dotted lines connect their child states, engaging in hidden negotiation. True social power lies in reading the dotted lines. Human interaction is an unconscious negotiation for dominance in strokes, not a straightforward transfer of facts. When an ongoing series of complementary, ulterior transactions progresses to a highly predictable, dramatic payoff, it is classified clinically as a game. Unlike pastimes, which structure time pleasantly, or rituals, which are predictable social habits, a game is inherently dishonest. It relies on a concealed snare. Take the archetypal marital game Dr. Berne identifies as If It Weren't For You. It typically features a highly domineering husband who severely restricts the social activities of his complaining wife. Overtly, this operates as a parent-to-child transaction. The husband issues instructions, and the wife complies. But the psychological level reveals a hidden child-to-child agreement. He is terrified of desertion, while she secretly needs his restrictions to avoid her social phobias. The wife's conscious distress is actually a highly successful defensive architecture. The game fulfills a homeostatic function. She safely avoids the public situations she fears, while extracting the exact masochistic strokes she requires to maintain her psychic equilibrium. To dismantle a pathological game, a clinician must deploy a specific strategy known as antithesis. Antithesis requires a player to actively refuse to provide the expected vector response. If the domineering husband suddenly says, "Go ahead and do it," instead of "Don't you dare," the game cannot proceed. When the defensive game is successfully undercut, the primary player falls into a state of acute despair. Their core phobias are unmasked and exposed to reality without the protection of the game. People fight intensely to preserve these destructive patterns because their psychic stability depends on them. Relinquishing the game forces an individual to attempt real, unscripted intimacy, a terrifying prospect for the vulnerable child. Mapping transactional vectors identifies the hidden mechanics of social conflict. By recognizing the ego state in control, individuals can navigate out of pathological traps and address the underlying hunger for structured interaction.